Insomnia. A state of affairs in which there is the desire for sleep, but at the same time, if this insomnia is sufficiently acute, a sense that sleep will bring all sorts of other problems. In other words, that anxiety becomes so acute that the person both wants to sleep and does not want to sleep. So it's a condition of both and, two contradictory things appearing at the same time. The idea that you can escape from something, but escape to where? Like Alice going down the rabbit hole. Exactly where is it she's going? There's an option to get out of her mundane life, but where will the rabbit hole take her? This notion of escape, but to where, defines current philosophical thinking on the post-human or the inhuman. When I ran the title for the poster, because Ian wanted one, I went with post-human. I realized 48 hours later I wanted to talk about inhuman. But hey, that's the way it goes. Advice to students in relation to getting the title right. Alain Badiou, probably the world's most famous contemporary philosopher, chair of philosophy at the École Normale, at the Sorbonne, and at the Swiss School of International Critical Thought. He proposes to us that we should understand inhuman as something other than a negation. Inhuman must be understood as the affirmative conceptual statement from within which one thinks the displacement of the human. And this displacement of the human always presupposes that one has accepted that the initial correlation is the link between the human and the inhuman, and not the perpetuation of the human as such. What is he talking about? Well, this is what I get. We need to move into a period of inhumanity. We need to leave the human behind. But the inhuman is in the human. In other words, we're going to take something of humanity, but at the same time, it's not going to be a type of humanity we recognize, because we need to change the human. The philosophical imperative is, we need to issue in the age of the inhuman. The question you are now asking is, why? Why such a radical proposal? Why such a contradictory proposal? Because at one and the same time, it's to issue in a new form of humanity, to lose an old form of humanity, but to also hold on to a form of humanity. Why? How could contemporary philosophy arrive at a moment where it is steeped in such contradiction? Or what we refer to as contradictory coherence. You want to know why? There's the culprit. His name is Jacques Derrida. He began to write about philosophy in the late 1960s. He proposed that Plato and Aristotle, that's Plato and Aristotle there, that Plato had introduced a way of thinking, and not just what we think about, but how we think, a way of thinking which shapes the way we have thought since. Derrida proposed that Plato introduced binary thinking. Plato was the first one to come up with the idea of the perfect world of forms. So we exist in a world which is imperfect and is a reflection of a perfect world of forms somewhere else, where we go after we die. Sound familiar? Also, as a result of this, then there is essence and there is mimesis. Plato, in his famous work, The Republic, which is sort of the ideal society, Plato banned poets because poets do mimesis. In other words, they pretend, they represent, and it is more important to focus on understanding and perceiving the essence of something, its actual truth. So on and so forth. So these are the ideas that Plato introduced 500 BCE, before the Common Era, more or less in Athens, in Greece. Then, throughout the history of philosophy, this is Duns Scotus. Duns Scotus was interested in the particular. He believed that from the particular, from the individual, from Muji, we can extrapolate something about all humanity. Whereas Aquinas believed the opposite, that we have to contemplate humanity in toto to come to understand what might constitute the individual. And here we have something that Plato introduced in relation to the particular and the universal. Now, Michel Foucault, who I said looks remarkably like Duns Scotus, right? Michel Foucault is the first one to recognize in the 1960s that the scapegoat in society makes the power structures of society visible. The insane person, the prisoner, the patient, all reveal the power structures that guide and structure the lunatic asylum, now referred to as a psychiatric institution, the prison, and the med school, and the hospital. Yeah, right? And he said that Plato's binaries are hierarchical. There is always one element in the binary that is superior to the other. There is always one that is more important. Man, woman, truth, falsity, etc. Derrida says, nah. He proposed that, first of all, there's no sense in doing without the concepts of metaphysics, the concepts of Plato. We have to use them because we cannot think outside them. We've become so used to thinking them, they are the shape of the way that we think. So rather than anyone proposing we can move outside ideas of oppositions, we have to think in oppositions. But Derrida proposes that we can play with oppositional structure. So Derrida is the first one to say, in relation to original and copy, we think, of course, as the original as hierarchically superior to the copy, because it's the original. The copy is inferior. Derrida says, it is the copy that produces the original. Otherwise, the original is just a thing. It's just an element in a series. But it derives its originality from the fact that it can be copied. Without the copy, the original is not original, and so on and so forth. Essence and mimesis, that in actual fact that we learn to play, that we're always engaged in a form of representation from the moment that we're children, so that if effectively mimesis, or representation, is actually our essence, and so on. The same and different. We would oppose the same and different. Derrida comes up with this great phrase, différence, which he says combines the English words to differ and defer. So it's a difference that happens in space and time, which means it's a difference that's different to itself. And you cannot place in opposition something that is already different to itself as the opposite of another element because it's already different to itself, and other such head-bending notions. The principle of Derridian deconstruction is play. You take the structure of what is offered to you and you play with it and try and come up with new formulations. Now, it was this play that introduced, along with the Frankfurt School, who were a series of theorists in Germany, Adorno and Walter Benjamin Horkheimer, introduced into the university institution the type of critique necessary to run courses in feminism, in colonial, post-colonial studies, and in all types of other studies that have materialized in the late 20th century in the university. Essentially courses that represent the decentering of white patriarchy, the idea that white man is the center of the universe. At least in university departments around Europe, it was possible for people to start to study women, feminism, and minorities who had hitherto only occupied the margins. This is also known, of course, as postmodernism. I have a definition there: contemporary movement of thought which rejects totalities, universal values, grand historical narratives, and the possibility of absolute objective knowledge. We now have, in our advanced state of postmodernism, or if postmodernism is coming to an end, even university courses in popular culture studies, transgender studies. You can even take a degree in desire from the University of Birmingham, which is a nice degree to have, presumably an MA and a PhD as well in desire. So, all taking place in a ludic frame, in this type of playful way that we're playing with established structures. Now, in 1985, in the middle of all this, Donna Haraway released a text that became seminal in many ways. It's called Cyborg Manifesto. She introduced an opposition between the human and the machine, and proposed in actual fact that the human and the machine are not opposites, using Derridian deconstructive play, but are more or less becoming the same thing. At the time when she was talking about it, she was talking about the notion of using Walkman, or having a pacemaker, but she was projecting into the future an increased technological invasion in relation to the human. Here's the primo post-human graph. So you see, for example, a way of describing the human body: metabrain, error correction device, instant delay, replay, and feedback. Nanotech data storage memory system. This is language used to describe the features of the human body. You see, the knee is turbocharged suspension flexibility. But what's very interesting about it is that we've arrived at a moment where we could use such technical language to actually describe the function and biology of the body, as takes place in this particular ad for all forms of physical enhancement. Biogenetics going on in the school as I speak, I imagine. Biogenetics throws up all sorts of interesting questions about the future of the species, about the future of babies. You know this story. But Zizek puts it this way: does biogenetics threaten our freedom and autonomy? The idea that if we play around with biogenetics, is it somehow going to encroach upon our lives? Is it going to change our lives? Is it going to impact the way the human race does its business? These are the questions we ask ourselves. Zizek says this is the wrong question. Zizek is Alan Badiou's Honto to his Lone Ranger at the moment. He's his philosophical sidekick. The two of them are probably the two most prominent philosophers. And Zizek puts it this way, that the real question is there something in the results of biogenetics that would force us to redefine what we understand by human nature? by the human way of being. In other words, is biogenetics actually introducing us to the need for a philosophy of the inhuman? Now, additionally, in the early 21st century, we have a trend towards evolutionary psychology, led by Steven Pinker. Pinker's view is this, is that we are evolving, and our psychology evolves, and that rationality, rather than something that we absorb and learn from culture, is something that comes from our biogenetic makeup. It's pretty much a neurobiological development. So if we're just left to our own devices for long enough, we have a bit of a sort of a use a spanner to tighten the brain here, just fix a synapse there. Before we know it, we'll have a moral, ethical universe that has arisen almost miraculously from the grey matter of our brain. You clearly imagine Pinker is not one of my favourite theorists. That the notion of rationality will guarantee an ethical world strikes me as remarkable when you think if you take rationality to its logical conclusion, like rationality in relation to, say, utilitarianism, that's when you have something like a Holocaust or the atomic bomb. Now, further, evolutionary psychology introduces a re-emphasis on human-animal studies, because if it's a question that our ethical moral systems are something that arise organically from our being, then it means we are more influenced by nature, which means we are more natural than we thought, which means we need to reformulate our relationship with animals, because we are just an evolved, advanced state of animal, and we need to rethink how we approach animals. Remember that contradictory coherence thing? Derrida's introduction to deconstruction? Yeah, but at the same time, if we're becoming more mechanized, then we also become more removed from animals, and animals become a kind of unknowable other. The reason that Zizek and Badiou are proposing that we need a new form, a new term to describe the human, is because we have all of these contradictory tensions going on in the nature of humanity as we understand it at the moment, and we can't accommodate them. We are on the one hand becoming more animal, we are on the other hand becoming more machine, under the terms of humanity. So they're saying, let's change the terms. This is great. This is Jonathan Culler. It's a long quote, but I couldn't resist reading it. This is Jonathan Culler. He's Cornell literature professor. And he's writing in his book on literary theory, he's talking about this notion of the animal as the unassimilable other, the animal that we can't understand. And he says, powerful strain of recent theoretical work focuses on the discontinuities, the radical otherness and inaccessibility of animals, whom we cannot presume to understand, especially once we move beyond dogs and horses. Stressing the role that notions of the animal have played in defining the human, this approach demands respect for the otherness of animals and accuses proponents of the first approach of anthropomorphizing, treating animals according to human models. Not something he would be doing himself when he refers to his ability to understand dogs and horses. I was in Bujumbura in Burundi last year, and we went to this tiny, sorry little zoo with about 5 animals. And right in the middle of it there was an alligator. Alligator, crocodile, alligator. Africa. Crocodile. This crocodile was busy eating a hamster that someone had thrown into the pen. And he looked up at me. And I looked at him. And I tell you that I knew what that animal was thinking. He was thinking, if that fence wasn't there, I would have you for breakfast. And it was like it was a cold staring eye, the cold staring eye of death. And we understood each other.